Waukesha, Wisconsin. May 31 St. 2014, 12-year-old Payton Leutner is crawling out of the woods. Covered in blood, she's been stabbed 19 times by her two best friends. They said it was to please Slender Man, not a person, not even real. A tall, faceless creature born from a website. This wasn't a horror story. This was real. Payton's lungs were collapsing. She could barely breathe. She whispered to a cyclist, "Please help me. I've been stabbed." Why would two kids do something so evil? What made them believe an internet myth was real? And what happened inside that dark forest that day? This is a true story. Subscribe to it Unbelievably and stay until the end, because the most haunting part is what happened after the stabbing. Saturday, May 31, 2014, Waukesha, Wisconsin. It was early morning in a quiet neighborhood. The trees were full, the air was warm, and families were waking up to a peaceful weekend. 12-year-old Payton Leutner had spent the night at her friend Morgan Geyser's house. It was supposed to be a fun sleepover, just like they'd done before. Morgan was her best friend. Also at the sleepover was Anissa Weier, another classmate. The three girls played games, talked about school, and whispered about something darker, something called Slender Man. None of them had seen him in real life. He didn't even exist. Slender Man was just an internet creation. A tall, thin, faceless man in a black suit. He had long arms, sometimes tentacles. He haunted forests. He kidnapped kids. Or so the story went. The legend had started as a Photoshop contest on a website called Creepypasta. But it had grown far beyond that. To Morgan and Anissa. Slender Man felt real, and that morning, they said they were going to meet him. But first, they had to prove themselves. So they took Payton into the woods. They told her they were going to play hide and seek. Payton smiled. She trusted them, but deep down, Morgan and Anissa had already made a plan. They had knives in their backpacks. They had practiced how to kill. They said they needed to do it for Slender Man, so they could live with him in his mansion deep in the woods, and if they didn't, they believed he would hurt their families. It wasn't a game. It was a sacrifice. They led Payton into the forest. Everything was quiet. Then it happened. Morgan pulled out the knife. She stabbed Payton once, twice, over and over. 19 times. Payton screamed. She begged. She cried, but Morgan didn't stop. Anissa stood nearby, watching. She didn't hold the knife, but she didn't stop it either. After the attack, Payton was left in the dirt, bleeding, alone. The girls told her to lie still. They said they would go get help, but that was a lie. They walked away. Payton, barely alive, dragged herself through the forest. Her lungs were punctured. She was losing blood fast, but she kept moving. She didn't want to die. Then, a man riding his bike through the park saw something strange. A young girl, crawling, blood all over her clothes. She looked up at him and whispered, "Please help me. I've been stabbed." Earlier that week, Morgan had shown Anissa images of Slender Man. They had spent hours reading Creepypasta stories, learning about his mansion, his servants, and the rules of the myth. The deeper they read, the more real it all felt. Morgan believed Slender Man was watching her. She thought he could read minds. She believed he lived in the forest and took children who pleased him. Anissa wasn't sure at first, but Morgan convinced her. If we don't do this, Morgan had said, he'll come after us. And slowly, belief turned into fear. They began planning. They brought a knife to the sleepover. They planned to do it in the middle of the night while Payton was asleep, but they couldn't go through with it. So they waited. The next morning they asked Payton to play hide and seek. Payton smiled. She didn't know this would be the last moment of her old life. Paramedics rushed Payton to the hospital. She had stab wounds to her chest, stomach, legs, and arms. One stab had missed her heart by less than a millimeter. Another had punctured her diaphragm. The doctors said if she had been found just a few minutes later, she might not have survived. She was only 12, while Payton fought for her life in the hospital. Police were searching for the other two girls. Morgan and Anissa had disappeared. They were walking on the side of the interstate headed toward the woods, toward Slender Man's mansion. They said a police officer spotted them and pulled over. They didn't run. They looked tired, confused, but calm, and then they told the truth. "We had to do it," Morgan said, "or else he would have killed our families." When police separated the girls and began questioning them, what came out chilled even the most experienced detectives. Morgan didn't cry. She spoke softly, almost blank. She screamed a lot. Morgan said about Payton, "Why did you stab her?" The officer asked. "To prove ourselves to Slender Man," she replied. so he wouldn't hurt us, Anissa said. I was surprised how calm she was. I thought she would die faster. Even the officers had to pause. These weren't adults. These were two 12-year-olds, yet the things they were saying sounded like something from a horror movie, only it was real. Every word was real. This is a real story. Every fact you hear is public. You can check it yourself if real-life mysteries leave you breathless. Subscribe now to It Unbelievably, because the next truth we uncover might hit even closer to home. Inside the interrogation room hours after the attack, the small room was cold. The walls were blank. 12-year-old Morgan Geyser sat at the table, legs swinging, her voice calm. There was no panic, no fear. She stared at the officer and spoke like it was normal. I didn't want to do this, she said softly, but I had to. Across the building, Anissa Weier was crying. She curled up in her chair. She covered her face, but when the questions started, her answers matched Morgan's. They believed Slender Man would kill them. They said if they didn't kill Payton, something even worse would happen. He watches you, Anissa whispered. He can read your thoughts. He's always there. The detectives were stunned. This wasn't just a prank gone wrong. This was delusion. This was something darker. Who was Slender Man? Slender Man wasn't born in the real world. He was made online. In 2009, a user named Eric Knudsen posted eerie photos on a forum called Something Awful. He edited in a tall, faceless man with long arms lurking behind children on playgrounds. The post said Slender Man stalked kids, drove them insane, made them disappear. It was part of a Photoshop contest, but something about the image stuck. Writers on other sites, like Creepypasta, added stories. Some said he had a mansion in the forest. Some said he whispered to children in their dreams. Others claimed he chose followers, young people who would kill for him. These were just stories, but to some, they became real beliefs. Back to the investigation. Warwickshire Police Department detectives pulled out the knife. It was over 5 inches long. A kitchen knife. They asked Morgan how she felt after the stabbing. She said nothing, just looked away, but then came a whisper. Payton said she hated me after I stabbed her. That's the part that made me sad. No remorse, just sadness that her friend was mad. Anissa said she hadn't done the stabbing, but she admitted she had told Morgan when to go. She confessed she helped plan it. For months, the two had talked about it at school, on the bus, through online messages. Morgan called it the plan to become proxies of Slender Man, servants of a digital ghost. Payton sighed. The survivor speaks. Meanwhile, Payton Leutner was alive, barely. Doctors had done emergency surgery. She was breathing through tubes. Her chest hurt with every breath, but she lived, and when detectives came to speak with her, she said something heartbreaking. I thought they were my friends. She didn't understand. Why would Morgan, her best friend since 4th grade, do this? Why would Anissa help? Payton said she remembered everything. They had gone to the woods, played around for a while. Then, Morgan tackled her. Then the pain came. Fast, sharp, burning. She remembered Anissa standing there watching. Then the lies. Lie down, Payton. You'll lose less blood. Then they left, and she was alone in the woods. The town reacts. Warwickshire. In shock, news spread fast. 12-year-old girl stabbed 19 times by friends in name of Slender Man. The headline made no sense. How could this be real? How could kids try to kill their friend for a character from the internet? The mayor gave a press conference. The police chief spoke calmly, but you could hear the disbelief in his voice. Parents held their children closer. Schools sent out letters, and the world started paying attention. CNN, NBC, the BBC, everyone covered it. People wanted to know, was the internet to blame? Or were these girls already broken? Psychological evaluations inside the minds of Morgan and Anissa. Courts ordered full psychiatric tests. The results were alarming. Morgan Geyser had been hearing voices since she was 3 years old. She believed in magical creatures, talked to imaginary people, and couldn't always tell fantasy from reality. Doctors diagnosed her with early-onset schizophrenia. Her father had the same condition. He had lived with hallucinations all his life. Morgan thought Slender Man was real. Not because she wanted to, because her brain told her it was true. Anissa Weier was different. She didn't see things. She didn't hear voices, but she believed in the myth. Anissa had no history of illness, but she had grown isolated, lonely, obsessed with internet horror. She said Morgan convinced her. She said she was afraid of Slender Man, afraid not to help. The trial's children tried as Adultshire District Attorney made a controversial decision. Both Morgan and Anissa would be charged as adults. The charge? Attempted first-degree homicide, each girl faced up to 65 years in prison. The public was divided. Some said the girls were monsters, others said they were mentally ill. But everyone agreed. It was horrifying. The courtrooms were full of reporters, lawyers and psychiatrists, and in the middle 2 small girls in handcuffs, orange jumpsuits, not even teenagers yet. Morgan barely spoke during the hearings. Anissa cried often. Their families sat behind them helpless. Payton's family sat too silent, angry, grieving. Their daughter had survived, but nothing would ever be the same. The Evidence Online Obsession Investigate searched the girls' computers and notebooks. What they found was disturbing. Images of Slender Man printed and taped to the walls. Notes saying, "We must kill to prove ourselves." Diaries with plans to lure Payton. Searches like how to kill someone quickly and what happens if you stab someone in the heart. The girls had even chosen a date, Morgan's birthday. They said it would make it special. They believed after the stabbing, they would walk to Slender Man's mansion, a place they thought was in Nicollet National Forest. They had packed snacks and water. They planned to run away forever. It didn't sound like imagination anymore. It sounded like a mission. This is not fiction. Every detail is part of a real case that you can verify yourself. 2 12-year-olds nearly killed their friend because of a story they read online, and what happened in court shocked everyone again. Courtroom drama. The trial's begin. The trial was unlike anything Yorkshire had ever seen. 2 girls, barely teenagers, being tried as adults for attempted murder. The public filled the courtroom. Some came to see justice. Others came to understand. How could something so evil grow in the minds of children? Morgan Geyser and Anissa Weier sat at separate tables. They rarely looked up. Their lawyers argued mental illness, not malice. The prosecution argued cold planning. They showed the drawings, the internet history, the knife. They pointed to 19 stab wounds. Intent was clear. They said the defense countered with Morgan's diagnosis, early onset schizophrenia. She wasn't in control. Her lawyer said she thought Slender Man would kill her family. Then came Anissa's defense. She didn't stab Payton. They reminded the jury. She didn't even touch the knife, but she helped plan it. She stood and watched. She believed what Morgan told her. Her attorney said she was afraid, manipulated, and lost. The courtroom was silent. Payton Leutner sat in the witness chair, brave, calm. Now a teenager, she told the court what happened, step by step. Her voice didn't crack, but her eyes were distant. She talked about hiding the pain, about crawling through the forest, about how she thought she was going to die. When asked how she felt about Morgan and Anissa, she paused. Then she simply said, "I loved my friends. I thought they loved me." You could hear people in the courtroom sniffling. Tears were silent, but they were everywhere. Verdicts and sentencing. The final judgment. Anissa Weier took a plea deal. She would avoid prison, but be sentenced to 25 years in a mental institution. She stood before the judge, shaking. "I never meant for anyone to get hurt," she said. "I was afraid of what would happen if we didn't do it." Morgan Geyser also accepted a plea. She admitted to the stabbing. She was sentenced to 40 years in a state mental hospital. The judge was firm. The horror of this act, and the depth of delusion behind it, demands long-term treatment and supervision. Morgan showed no reaction. Anissa cried again. The courtroom exhaled, but no one felt relief because there were no winners here, only scars. Payton had survived 19 stab wounds, but the healing wasn't over. She had nightmares for years. She slept with scissors under her pillow. She didn't trust people easily, but she also grew strong. She worked with therapists. She returned to school. She learned to smile again. In a rare interview years later, Payton said, "I didn't want to be defined by what happened to me," and she wasn't. She became a symbol of strength. The girl who lived, the girl who forgave, but the memory would never leave her, neither would the scars. The world reacts. Slender Man under Fireth case caused an explosion online. Suddenly, everyone was talking about internet horror culture. Creepypasta forums shut down temporarily. Writers posted disclaimers on their stories. Slender Man fan art disappeared from social media. Parents demanded better monitoring of online content. Senators debated whether digital fiction could influence children dangerously. Some experts warned kids under 13 can't always separate fantasy from reality. Others asked, but is it the story's fault, or what the story awakens? In schools, teachers added new lessons about media literacy. In homes, conversations about online safety increased. But one thing was clear: Slender Man, a character made as a joke, had now entered real-life horror, psychology of a myth, how fiction turned to violence. Experts were brought on talk shows. Psychologists explained the strange phenomenon. It wasn't just a story. It was a delusion shared between two vulnerable minds. Morgan's schizophrenia blurred her sense of reality, and Anissa's fear made her believe in the unbelievable. Together, they formed a closed loop of belief. Morgan saw Slender Man, Anissa believed Morgan. They fed each other's fears, and in that bubble, the idea of murder became the answer, not out of hate, out of desperation, out of the need to survive something they thought was real. It was called shared psychosis or folie due. Two people, one shared delusion, but the damage it caused? Real, very real. A turning point. Can the internet be dangerous? The stabbing triggered deeper questions about how the internet shapes young minds. Slender Man was not created to harm. He was art. He was fiction, but in the wrong hands. He became a weapon. Some argued it was time to restrict horror content. Others argued for better mental health care, especially for children, especially for those showing early signs of illness. Morgan had schizophrenia. For years before anyone noticed. Could it have been stopped? Could therapy or medication have changed the outcome? Could teachers or parents have seen the warning signs? The questions remained and still echo today. This is not fiction. Every word you've heard is real. Every fact is part of the case files. News reports, court transcripts. A young girl nearly died because two other girls believed the impossible. What happened next? A world-changed Slender Man never disappeared completely. He faded from the spotlight, but he's still out there on the edges of the internet. People still write stories, still draw him. But now there's always a warning, always a reminder. He's not real, but what people do because of him can be. Anissa Weier was released early in 2021 after serving 7 years in a mental health facility. She is now under strict supervision. Morgan Geyser remains in institutional care. She filed for early release in 2023 but was denied. Payton Leutner, she lives quietly. She keeps her life private, but she carries with her the truth. She survived. The forest to Daithwoods in Warwickshire are quiet again. The path where Payton crawled is grown over with grass. The trees stand tall, still, silent, but if you listen closely, you might hear the past. You might hear whispers that aren't there, because even though Slender Man wasn't real, the pain left behind still is. When the news first broke, America held its breath. The facts were so surreal, they almost didn't feel real. Two 12-year-old girls, a made-up monster. A friend stabbed 19 times. Parents across the country sit their children down. They asked, "Do you know what Slender Man is?" Some kids had heard of him, others hadn't, but almost overnight, Slender Man became a household name for all the wrong reasons. News anchors repeated his name again and again. Talk shows invited psychologists, criminologists, even creepypasta writers. The media was both fascinated and horrified. How could fiction lead to attempted murder? And how could children plan something so dark? And so quietly? The creepypasta community response online. The creators of Slender Man content were devastated. They hadn't meant to cause harm. Many spoke out immediately. The original creator of Slender Man, Eric Knudsen aka Victor Surge, posted a short message. "I am deeply saddened by the tragedy in Wisconsin, and my heart goes out to those affected." Writers began removing or disclaiming their stories. Fan pages shut down. Even the Creepypasta wiki added warnings and age guidelines, but the damage was already done. The myth had crossed a line and real blood had been spilled. Slender Man on trial, not legally, but culturally not charged. Slender Man became a silent defendant. Was he just a story or something more powerful? Did fiction inspire a crime or just give it shape? Cultural commentators weighed in. Some blamed the internet, saying children were too exposed to dark content without guidance. Others blamed mental health failures, arguing Morgan's schizophrenia should have been caught sooner. Some said Anissa was a follower, trapped in Morgan's delusion. Others weren't so sure, but one thing became undeniable: the line between fiction and belief had blurred, and 3 lives were forever altered because of it. This is a real story. Every fact you hear is public. You can check it yourself if real-life mysteries leave you breathless. Subscribe now to It Unbelievably, because the next truth we uncover might hit even closer to home. Lingering questions: could this have been prevented? In the aftermath, many asked, could anyone have stopped this? Morgan's parents said they didn't see the signs, but they did later reveal something chilling. Morgan used to see things we didn't see, talk to things we couldn't hear. She once told her mother she believed in Voldemort, and that he lived in her closet. Another time, she said unicorns were real. At first, her parents thought she just had an active imagination. They didn't. No, it was schizophrenia, an extremely rare diagnosis in someone so young. Morgan was later described by doctors as unable to distinguish between fantasy and reality. Her delusions were so deep. She believed Slender Man lived in a mansion in the Nicolet National Forest. She thought she had to kill for him, or he would hurt her family. Anissa, meanwhile, showed no signs of mental illness, but she believed Morgan, trusted her, feared the consequences of not listening. School, silence, and shadows. Their classmates were shocked. Teachers were heartbroken. I would never have guessed, one said. They were quiet, but not violent. After the stabbing, school, policies changed. Teachers were trained to notice signs of obsessive behavior. Counselors were added. Kids were encouraged to speak up, but the sense of innocence of childhood safety was broken. In Warwickshire, parents walked their kids to school more often. Trust didn't come easy anymore, not even between friends. Payton's silent strength, a symbol of Servival. Payton never sought the spotlight. She declined most interviews, but in the few she gave, she spoke with clarity, with calm, and with strength far beyond her years. I was scared, but I didn't want to die. She never called Morgan and Anissa evil. She called them broken. Payton showed forgiveness, but never forgot. She became a quiet symbol for survivors everywhere, a reminder that even in horror, there is resilience. Even in betrayal, there can be grace. The Slender Man stabbing wasn't the first time fiction affected reality, but it was. One of the most shocking. It showed how imagination left unchecked can twist into obsession. It raised deep, haunting questions. Can children truly know the weight of their actions? When does fantasy become dangerous? And who is responsible when belief becomes deadly? Today, Slender Man still exists online, but not in the same way. He's no longer just a myth or a meme. He's become a cautionary tale, a ghost of what the internet can become. His long arms, empty face, and haunting silence now carry a real-world meaning, not because he's real, but because someone thought he was. Because belief when fed by fear can overpower logic, and because in the wrong mind, even a story can kill. Documentaries, films, and controversy. The stabbing inspired multiple documentaries. Beware the Slender Man. HBO 2016 gave a chilling, in-depth look at the case. News specials, crime podcasts, and YouTube videos followed. In 2018, a Slender Man horror movie was released but met with public backlash. Many felt it was too soon. The families of the girls involved were not consulted. Payton's family called it sickening. Some theaters refused to screen the movie out of respect for the victim. Even in horror entertainment, there are lines, and this case had crossed one. This is not fiction. Every detail is part of a real case that you can verify yourself. 3 girls, 1 myth, and a moment that shattered their world. Haunting final questions. What does it say about a world where children kill for imaginary monsters? What would you do if your best friend turned on you? Would you see the signs? Would you believe them? Would you survive? Have you heard this story before? What do you think truly happened that day? If you're drawn to real stories that stay with you, subscribe now to Unbelievably, because every week we reveal the darkest truths hidden in plain sight. Watch the next video on your screen, or dive into our full playlist of true crime and real-life mysteries. The next story might be even more shocking.